The boy's wrists were bound so tight the rope had turned the skin purple. He couldn't have been more than 12, maybe 13 if you counted hard years. He knelt in the dirt outside the grain depot, hands tied behind his back, head hanging low enough that his dark hair fell across his eyes. A younger girl sat beside him, 8, maybe 9, her thin arms wrapped around her knees, her dress torn at the shoulder. She wasn't crying. She was past that. Behind them, a man in a dusty coat and silver watch chains stood with his arms crossed, speaking to the depot manager like he was discussing the price of feed. 2 of them, the man said, his voice flat. Brother and sister, parents died 3 weeks back. Cholera, no kin to speak of. I'm owed for the funeral costs, the coffins, the land they were squatting on. Judge signed the paperwork. They work off the debt or they go to the county home. The depot manager scratched his jaw. How much they owe? $40. 40, the manager let out a low whistle. That's a lot of digging for 2 skinny kids. The man shrugged. Then someone buys the contract. Either way, I get paid. The girl finally looked up. Her face was streaked with dust, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She just stared at the man in the coat with the kind of hollow silence that comes after screaming stops working. The boy shifted his weight, wincing as the rope bit deeper. His voice came out cracked, quiet. Mister, please, we'll work. We'll do anything, just don't separate us. The man didn't even glance down. Not my problem, son. A small crowd had gathered near the wagon yard, ranch hands, a few townspeople, a woman holding a basket of bread. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was the kind of scene folks pretended not to see, the kind that made you walk a little faster and keep your eyes on the ground. Then the rancher arrived. He came on foot, not horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 50 years old, with a weathered face and gray starting to thread through his beard. His boots were scuffed, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He carried no gun on his hip, just a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He stopped a few feet from the depot steps and looked at the children, then at the man in the coat, then back at the children. The man in the coat noticed him and straightened. Help you with something. The rancher didn't answer right away. He set his satchel down slowly, then crouched in front of the boy, eye level, close enough that the boy flinched. What's your name? The rancher asked. The boy hesitated. His voice was barely a whisper. Thomas. And her? My sister, Clara. The rancher nodded once, then stood and turned to face the man in the coat. How much? The man's expression shifted, half surprise, half suspicion. $40, contract's legal. Judge signed it himself. I didn't ask if it was legal. I asked how much. 40. The rancher reached into his satchel and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted the bills slowly, deliberately, then held them out. Here's 50, the extra 10s for your trouble walking away and not coming back. The man in the coat stared at the money, then at the rancher. You know these kids? No. Then why? Take the money or don't. I'm not here to explain myself. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he might argue. Then he snatched the bills, stuffed them into his coat, and turned on his heel without another word. The crowd parted as he walked through, and within seconds, he was gone. The rancher knelt again and pulled a folding knife from his belt. He cut the ropes around Thomas's wrists in 2 swift motions, then helped the boy to his feet. Thomas stumbled, his legs shaky, his hands trembling as the blood rushed back into his fingers. Clara stood slowly, watching the rancher with wide, unblinking eyes. Can you walk? The rancher asked. Thomas nodded. Good, my wagon's just down the road. Come on. He turned and started walking, not waiting to see if they followed. For a moment, neither child moved. Then Thomas took Clara's hand and they hurried after him. The rancher's wagon was simple, wooden bed, 2 horses, a canvas tarp covering supplies in the back. He gestured for them to climb in, then untied the reins and climbed onto the driver's seat. As the wagon rolled forward, Thomas finally found his voice. Mister, thank you, we'll work. We'll pay you back every cent, I swear it." The rancher didn't look back. No need. "But you don't owe me anything." Clara leaned against her brother, her small voice cutting through the rumble of the wheels. "Why'd you help us?" The rancher was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too soft to hear over the road noise. "Because somebody should have helped me once, and nobody did." The wagon creaked on. The sun hung low and orange on the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley. Behind them, the depot grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Thomas looked down at his raw wrists, then at his sister. She was already asleep, her head resting on his shoulder. He didn't understand what had just happened. He didn't understand why a stranger would pay $50 for two kids he didn't know. But for the first time in 3 weeks, Thomas felt something other than fear. He felt safe. The rancher's property sat at the edge of a wide valley, bordered by pine trees on one side and a narrow creek on the other. The house was small but sturdy, log walls, a stone chimney, a covered porch with 2 rocking chairs. A barn stood nearby, its doors open to reveal hay bales and a few horses. The rancher pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "You'll sleep in the loft tonight. There's blankets up there. I'll bring food in a bit." Thomas and Clara climbed out slowly, still uncertain. The rancher nodded toward the barn, then walked toward the house without another word. Inside the barn, the loft was warm and dry. Straw covered the floor, and thick wool blankets were folded neatly in the corner. Clara curled up immediately, exhausted. Thomas sat beside her, his mind racing. Who was this man? Why had he done this? And what would happen tomorrow? He didn't have answers, but as the stars began to appear through the cracks in the barn roof, Thomas made himself a promise. Whatever this rancher wanted, whatever he needed, Thomas would do it. He would work harder than anyone. He would prove he was worth saving. Because nobody had ever done something like this for him before. And he would never, ever forget it. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Thomas woke to sunlight streaming through the loft, and Clara still asleep beside him, her face finally peaceful. He climbed down the ladder carefully, his wrists still sore, and stepped out into the cool dawn air. The rancher was at the outdoor fire pit, turning strips of bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced up as Thomas approached, then nodded toward a wooden bench. "Sit, food's almost ready." Thomas sat. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. The rancher plated the bacon, added some fried potatoes, and handed Thomas the plate along with a tin cup of water. "Eat, then we'll talk." Thomas ate slowly, his stomach twisting with nerves despite the hunger. The food was simple but good, better than anything he'd had in weeks. Clara woke a few minutes later and joined them, and the rancher made her a plate too. When they finished, the rancher poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the fence rail, studying them both. "I'm going to ask you some questions. I need honest answers." Thomas nodded. "Yes, sir." "Your parents, how'd they die?" "Cholera 3 weeks ago. We buried them ourselves." "Any other family?" "No, sir, just us." The rancher took a sip of coffee. "And that man yesterday, the one with the contract, who was he?" "Mr. Calloway, he owned the land we lived on. Said we owed him for the burial, the coffins, everything. Said if we didn't pay, he'd sell the contract to whoever wanted it." The rancher's jaw tightened slightly. "Did your parents owe him money before they died?" Thomas hesitated. I don't know. Pa never talked about it." "What was your father's name?" Henry Garrett." The rancher went very still. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at Thomas like he'd seen a ghost. Thomas felt his stomach drop. "Sir, did you know him?" The rancher set his coffee down slowly. When he spoke, his voice was tight, controlled. "What was your mother's name?" "Elena." The rancher closed his eyes. His hand gripped the fence rail hard enough that his knuckles turned white. Clara looked up at Thomas, confused. Thomas didn't understand either. Finally, the rancher opened his eyes and looked directly at Thomas. "Your father and I knew each other a long time ago." Thomas's heart pounded. "How?" The rancher took a slow breath. "We served together during the war, same unit, same battles." He paused, his voice dropping. "Your father saved my life." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thomas stared. "What?" The rancher turned away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Shiloh, April 1862, I took a rifle shot to the chest, went down hard. Your father dragged me half a mile through open ground while they were still shooting, got me to the field surgeon, stayed with me for 2 days while I was out of my head with fever." He paused. "If he hadn't done that, I'd be in a grave in Tennessee right now." Thomas felt his throat tighten. I didn't know." "I don't imagine he talked about it much. He wasn't the type." The rancher's voice softened. "After the war, we went our separate ways. I came out here, built this place. I heard he'd settled somewhere east, but I never saw him again." He looked back at Thomas. "And now he's gone." Clara's voice was small. "You knew our pa." The rancher nodded. "I did, and he was a good M." "And?" Thomas's hands trembled. "Then, yesterday, when you saw us, did you know?" "No," the rancher shook his head. "Not until you said his name just now." Thomas felt something crack open inside him, grief, relief, confusion all tangled together. "But you still helped us, even before you knew." The rancher met his eyes. "I helped you because it was the right thing to do, but now," he paused, his voice rough, "now I know who you are, and that changes everything." "How?" The rancher straightened, his expression firm. "Because your father gave me a second chance at life, and I'll be damned if I let his children go without one." Thomas's vision blurred. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Clara stood and walked over to the rancher. She looked up at him, her small hand reaching out to touch his sleeve. "Are you going to keep us?" The rancher crouched down to her level. "If you'll stay, then yes. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "We don't have any money. We can't pay you back." The rancher's voice was steady. "You don't owe me anything. Not money, not work, not gratitude. You're here because you're supposed to be here." Thomas finally found his voice, broken and raw. Why would you do this?" The rancher stood and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Because your father didn't leave me behind, and I won't leave you behind either." Thomas broke. The tears came hard and fast, and he didn't try to stop them. Clara wrapped her arms around him, and the rancher stood there quietly, letting them cry. When the tears finally slowed, Thomas wiped his face and looked up at the rancher. "What do we call you?" The rancher smiled faintly. "My name's Samuel, Sam if you like." "Mr. Sam," Thomas said, his voice steadier now. "We'll work hard. We'll earn our keep, I promise." Sam shook his head. "You'll go to school. You'll learn to read and write proper. You'll help around the ranch when you can, but you're not hired hands. You're family." Clara's eyes went wide. "Family." Sam nodded. "Family." Thomas felt something settle in his chest, something warm and solid and real. For the first time since his parents died, he felt like he could breathe again. "We'll never forget this kindness," Thomas said quietly. Sam looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "It's not kindness, son," he said. "It's family." 3 days passed in quiet rhythm. Thomas and Clara settled into the ranch like they'd always been there. Sam taught Thomas how to mend fence posts and check the horses for stones in their hooves. Clara helped gather eggs and learned to churn butter. At night, they sat on the porch and Sam told them stories, some about the war, some about the land, some about nothing in particular. It felt like peace. But peace in the West never lasted long. On the 4th morning, riders appeared on the ridge. Sam saw them first. He was fixing the barn door hinge when he paused, his hand going still on the hammer. Thomas followed his gaze and saw them, 3 men on horseback, silhouetted against the bright sky. "Go inside," Sam said quietly. "Take Clara, stay there until I say otherwise." Thomas's stomach twisted. Who are they? I don't know yet. Go. Thomas ran to the house, grabbed Clara, and pulled her inside. They crouched by the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The riders came down slowly, deliberately. When they reached the yard, they stopped. The man in the center dismounted first, tall, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his vest. The county sheriff. His name was Dalton. Sam recognized him immediately. Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Morning, Sam. Sheriff, Sam's voice was even controlled. What brings you out here? Heard you made a purchase in town a few days back. 2 children, bought out a debt contract from Callaway. That's right. Dalton nodded slowly. See, that's where it gets interesting, because Callaway came to me yesterday, said he thinks he got cheated, said the contract was worth more than $50 and he wants it voided. Sam's jaw tightened. The contract's settled. He took the money. That's the end of it. Not quite, Dalton gestured to the men behind him. Callaway's filed a complaint. Says the children are runaways now. Says they're his property until the debt's fully paid and you had no legal right to take them. Sam's voice went cold. They're not property. Legally, they are. The judge signed the papers. The war ended that kind of thinking, Dalton. You know that. Dalton's smile faded. The war ended a lot of things, Sam, but debt contracts, those are still legal, and if Callaway wants those kids back, the law says he can have them. Inside the house, Thomas felt Clara grip his hand. Her voice was a terrified whisper. They're going to take us back. No, Thomas said, but his voice shook. No, they won't. Outside, Sam took a step forward. Those children sent. I hear. Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun belt. That's not your call to make. It is now. One of the men behind Dalton shifted in his saddle. Sam recognized him, a hired gun named Porter, known for taking jobs that skirted the edge of the law. The third man was younger, nervous, probably just there for numbers. Dalton's voice dropped. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sam. Hand them over and we'll forget this happened. No. You know I can arrest you for obstruction, interfering with a legal contract. You want to spend the next 6 months in a cell. Sam didn't flinch. You can try. The tension in the yard was thick enough to choke on. Dalton's hand hovered near his gun. Porter's eyes narrowed. The young man looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Then a voice came from the road. That's far enough, Dalton. Everyone turned. A man on horseback rode into the yard, older, grizzled, with a rifle resting across his saddle. Behind him came 2 more riders, then 3 more. Within seconds, 8 men had formed a loose line behind Sam, all of them armed, all of them watching Dalton with hard eyes. Sam recognized them immediately. Ranch hands from neighboring properties, men he'd worked alongside for years, men who'd heard what happened in town and decided they weren't going to let it stand. The man with the rifle, a weathered rancher named Calhoun, spoke again. You got a problem here, Sheriff. Dalton's face went tight. This is official business, Calhoun. Stay out of it. Official business, Calhoun spat into the dirt. You mean shaking down a man for helping 2 orphaned kids, that the kind of law you're enforcing now? Porter's hand moved toward his gun, but Calhoun's rifle shifted just enough to make him freeze. Easy, boy, Calhoun said. You draw on me and you'll be dead before you clear leather. Dalton looked around, his eyes calculating. 8 armed men, maybe more on the way. His odds had just turned very bad. He forced a smile. No need for this to get ugly. We'll sort it out in town, legal-like. You do that, Calhoun said. And while you're at it, tell Callaway that if he sets foot on Sam's land, he'll answer to all of us. Dalton stared at Sam for a long moment. Then he mounted his horse, jerked the reins, and rode off without another word. Porter and the younger man followed. When they were gone, Calhoun lowered his rifle and looked at Sam. You all right? Sam nodded slowly. Yeah, thanks. Don't mention it. Calhoun glanced toward the house, where Thomas and Clara's faces were still pressed against the window. Those the kids. Yeah. Calhoun smiled faintly. Good, they stay. The other men murmured agreement, then turned their horses and rode off one by one. Within minutes, the yard was empty again. Sam stood there for a long moment, his heart still pounding. Then he turned and walked toward the house. Thomas and Clara met him at the door. Clara threw her arms around him, and Thomas just stood there, shaking. It's over, Sam said quietly. They're not coming back. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Dalton would be back. Calloway would push harder. The law, twisted as it was, still had teeth. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, Sam sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars. Thomas came out a few minutes later and sat beside him. Neither spoke for a while. The crickets filled the silence and the creek murmured in the distance. Finally, Thomas broke the quiet. Why'd those men come to help you? Sam took a sip of coffee. Because they're decent, and because they've seen enough cruelty in their lives to know when to stand against it. But they don't even know us. No, but they know me, and they know I wouldn't fight for something unless it mattered. Thomas looked down at his hands. Mr. Sam, what if they come back? What if the law says we have to go? Sam was quiet for a moment, then he set his cup down and turned to face Thomas. Then we'll deal with it together. But listen to me, son. Sam's voice was firm but gentle. I made you a promise. You and Clara are staying here. I don't care what Dalton says. I don't care what Calloway wants. This is your home now, and I will fight for that. Do you understand? Thomas's throat tightened. Yes, sir. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a worn brass pocket watch. He held it out to Thomas. This was your father's. Thomas's eyes went wide. What? He gave it to me after Shiloh, said I'd earned it for sticking around. Sam smiled faintly. I told him I'd give it back someday, never got the chance, but I can give it to you. Thomas took the watch carefully, his hands trembling. The brass was warm, the engraving on the back faded but still readable. Henry Garrett, 1840. He carried this, Thomas whispered. Every day. Thomas opened the watch. Inside was a small photograph, faded, cracked, but still clear. A young woman holding a baby, his mother, and H. I am. He couldn't speak. The tears came fast and silent. Sam placed a hand on his shoulder. Your father was a good man, Thomas, one of the best I ever knew, and you're his son. That means something. Thomas wiped his eyes. I wish he was here. So do I. They sat in silence again, the weight of loss hanging between them. But it wasn't a lonely weight anymore. It was shared. After a while, Clara came out and curled up beside Thomas. Sam wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she smiled up at him. Mr. Sam, she said quietly. Yes. Are we really staying forever? Sam nodded. As long as you want. Clara leaned against him, her voice sleepy. Good, because I like it here. Sam's chest tightened. He looked at these two children, broken, scared, but still hoping, and he realized something. He hadn't just saved them. They'd saved him too. For years, he'd lived alone, worked alone, kept the world at arm's length because it was easier that way, because losing people hurt and he'd lost enough. But now, sitting on this porch with Henry Garrett's children beside him, Sam understood something he'd forgotten. Family wasn't about blood. It was about who you chose to stand beside when the world tried to tear you down. And he'd chosen them. The next morning, Sam took Thomas and Clara into town, not to hide, not to run, but to make a statement. They walked down the main street together, past the general store, past the saloon, past the depot where it had all started. People stared, whispers followed them, but Sam didn't care. He stopped in front of the land office and walked inside. The clerk looked up, startled. I want to file adoption papers, Sam said. The clerk blinked. For these two, Sam gestured to Thomas and Clara. I'm claiming legal guardianship. Full adoption. Whatever paperwork it takes, I'll sign it. The clerk hesitated. Sir, I'll need to check with the judge. There's the matter of the debt contract. The debt's paid. Calloway got his money. Now I'm making this official. The clerk nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. You do that. Sam turned and walked out, Thomas and Clara following close behind. As they stepped back onto the street, Thomas looked up at him. You really mean it? You're adopting us. I do. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Why? Sam crouched down and looked her in the eye. Because you're mine now, both of you, and nobody's taking you away. Clara threw her arms around his neck, and Thomas stood there, clutching his father's watch, his heart too full for words. So here's the question that changes everything. If you were Sam, would you have fought for them? Would you have stood against the law, the sheriff, the whole county, just to keep two children safe? Take a deep breath, think about that. Because what happens next will test every promise Sam just made. The judge arrived 2 weeks later. His name was Whitmore, a thin man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He came to Sam's ranch in a black carriage, accompanied by the county clerk and one witness. No Dalton, no guns. Sam met him on the porch. Thomas and Clara stood behind him, nervous but steady. Judge Whitmore stepped down from the carriage and nodded. Mr. Brennan. Judge. I've reviewed the paperwork, the adoption request, the debt contract, all of it. He paused. I also received a letter from 7 ranch owners in this valley, every one of them vouching for your character. Calhoun, Morrison, the others, they made their position very clear. Sam said nothing. Whitmore sighed. Mr. Calloway tried to push this further, said you acted outside the law, but the truth is you didn't. You paid the debt in full. The contract was satisfied. Legally, the children are free. He looked at Thomas and Clara. And now you want to make it permanent. I do. Whitmore studied them for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed document. Then it's done. Legal guardianship granted. They're yours, Mr. Brennan. In the eyes of the law, they're your children now. Sam took the document slowly, his hands steady but his heart pounding. Thomas stared. That's it, we can stay. You can stay, Whitmore said. He glanced at Sam. You're a good man, Brennan. The world could use more like you. Sam didn't respond. He just nodded. Whitmore climbed back into his carriage and rode off, the clerk and witness following behind. When they were gone, Sam looked down at the paper in his hands. Then he looked at Thomas and Clara. It's official, he said quietly. You're Brennan's now. Clara's face broke into a smile, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thomas just stood there, clutching his father's watch, his vision blurring. Sam pulled them both into his arms, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The years that followed were not easy. Thomas worked the ranch alongside Sam, learning every skill, how to brand cattle, how to mend fences, how to read the weather. Clara went to school in town and became known for her sharp mind and quick smile. Sam never remarried, but he didn't need to. His family was here. Word spread about what Sam had done. Other ranchers followed his example. When orphaned children appeared in town, victims of disease, accident, or cruelty, families stepped forward. The valley became known for it. A place where children were not abandoned. A place where community meant something. Calloway tried to stir trouble once more, but Calhoun and the others made it clear. Cruelty would not be tolerated. Calloway left the county within a year, his reputation in ruins. Dalton stayed on as sheriff, but he never set foot on Sam's land again. He knew better. Thomas grew into a man his father would have been proud of, strong, steady, honorable. He married a girl from town and built a house on the edge of Sam's property. Clara became a teacher, opening a small schoolhouse in the valley. Both carried their father's name with pride. And Sam, he lived to see his grandchildren. He taught them the same lessons he'd taught Thomas and Clara, that kindness wasn't weakness, that family wasn't blood, and that standing for what's right mattered more than standing alone. On his 70th birthday, Thomas gave him a gift, a new pocket watch engraved with a single line. For the man who saved us twice. Sam held it in his weathered hands and smiled. I didn't save you, son. Your father did. I just finished what he started. Thomas shook his head. No, you gave us a life. You gave us a home. You gave us everything. Sam looked at his family, Thomas, Clara, their spouses, their children, all gathered on the porch of the ranch he'd built with his own hands, and he realized something. Henry Garrett had saved his life all those years ago in Tennessee, but these children, Henry's children, had given him a reason to live. That was the real gift. Not survival, but purpose. Years later, long after Sam had passed, Thomas would sit on that same porch and tell his own grandchildren the story. How a stranger in a town square saw two children in chains and decided to act. How that stranger turned out to be a man who owed a debt to their great-grandfather. How that debt became a family. And when the children asked why Sam had done it, Thomas would smile and repeat the words Sam had spoken so many years before. It wasn't kindness, it was family. The wind stirred the pine trees. The creek murmured its endless song, and the valley, built on the foundation of one man's courage and a dozen others' loyalty, continued to thrive. Because that's what family does. It endures.